So it's a bad anime. So what? Here we are with another garbage tier isekai series that just proves why this genre has its reputation. But this one is kinda special to me because it's one of my guilty pleasure series. Yeah, since I did the whole bash rent-a-girlfriend thing, I figured I should open myself up to a bit of the same criticism and talk about an anime that I should not have enjoyed as much as I did. Yeah, I liked this anime, but it's still a raging dumpster fire of a production. It has a hard time staying within its fantasy setting, presents some very, very bad CGI animation for literally every fight scene, and turns into an utter mess by the end as shit makes less sense than it does when you start. But, and bear with me here, it's not actually that terrible. The main character is a total goofball who turns a literal living hell into a joke by treating it like a video game and deciding to survive that way. And this series, once I started reading the books anyway, actually lays out a solid foundation for why things are so wildly outrageous. So before I get any farther into this mess, I'm going to put up a spoiler alert to if you actually don't want to hear spoilers for this garbage anime. So I'm a Spider, So What starts off with a whole classroom of Japanese high school students getting absolutely annihilated by some bizarre accident that blew up their entire classroom. And as a result, Hiro Wakaba, or Kumiko as she's referred to multiple times in the series, is reincarnated into an arachnophobe's worst nightmare, the Great Elro Labyrinth. And now the labyrinth is home to many species of monster, but Wakaba finds herself reincarnated as one of the creepiest and crawliest of them all, a giant spider. Determined to not get snuffed by the dangerous environment and monster battle royale at the bottom of the labyrinth, she starts her journey off by heading for the surface, using this world's skill and leveling system to get more powerful, gain new abilities, evolve into more powerful forms, and eventually reach the surface. In the process, though, she gains the attention of a few very powerful and incredibly dangerous people. The first of which to appear is shortly after she defeats her first dragon. A mysterious man in black appears out of nowhere and intends to kill her to prevent any disruptions to the world. And he could have done it easily too, if not for the intervention of an outside power. Either way, this man in black is named Gilidostotes, a literal god in this world and master of all the dragons, as well as an administrator for the system that provides the game-like aspect of this bizarre fantasy world. And he only stops short of killing Wakaba after receiving a warning from a far more powerful and much more sinister administrator god, who only goes by D. D makes it a point to intervene whenever they feel like it, and gives a bit of aid to Wakaba along the way. Eventually, you find out that D was masquerading as one of the students, and that the explosion that killed them all was meant to kill D. And feeling a bit guilty over the incident, D decides to reincarnate the students, as well as their teacher, into this world, and give them each a unique power. Fortunately for Wakaba, though, D is not the second person who she managed to piss off. That slot is filled by the ridiculously overpowered demon lord named Ariel, and despite looking like a 12-year-old girl, is one of the most unstoppable beings on the planet. Look, if you can learn one thing from isekai anime, it is that you never screw with the little girls. They're always the most powerful. No matter what, you just don't. Anyway, Ariel gets pissed because Wakaba attacks and kills the queen of the spiders in the labyrinth, which was the demon lord's personal pet. So she goes on the hunt for the slippery white spider that's ruining her day, and finds that Wakaba's knack for developing cheaty and busted strategies is far more than she can handle. But while Wakaba uses teleportation to play tag with the demon lord, she's also interfering with the human world, using healing magic to turn herself into a local deity, interfering with the machinations of very powerful villains, and even creating mass casualties as she gets involved in a battle that results in the destruction of 2 armies. And this is the point where things start to get out of hand. After a chance encounter with one of her former classmates, Wakaba gets entangled in a plot to abduct the infant reincarnations and finds herself duking it out with yet another very powerful person, Patimus Harafenis, the chief of the elves. Well, Patimus turns out to be an android capable of disabling the system in a small area and has a gun for a hand and starts shooting magic bullets everywhere. And only when Ariel makes a dramatic entry and destroys the Terminator elf in one shot does that fight end. From there, Wakaba and Ariel declare a truce since neither is capable of killing the other and they don't want to waste the time and effort. And thus begins the very tenuous relationship between Ariel and the shitty little spider that everyone wants dead. Layered over all of this is the pseudo-protagonist of the story, Prince Shun, and his gaggle of girlfriends. It isn't explicitly stated, but these points where Shun is the main focus is something like 14 years after the events I just described. Basically, Shun's older brother dies in battle, and the hero title falls to Shun. What is the hero title, you may ask? Basically, it's plot armor, and it makes Shun capable of killing any character in the series. Coupled with his Deus Ex Machina skill that makes everything work out for the better, he gets all the typical protagonist powers but isn't actually the main character. So Shun is driven from his homeland by an insurrection, runs to the elf village at the behest of his former teacher, and finds himself entangled in a massive battle between the elves, the Ranksent Empire headed by one of his fellow reincarnations and rival, Hugo, and the Demon Lord's armies. Of course, in the middle of this three-way battle, the elves decide to deploy their fully mechanized army of super robots that resist magic, and Shun tries to fend off some high-ranking members of the demon army in the form of his former classmates. And yet again, things turn sideways as Wakaba shows up in an all-new form. If things seem incomprehensible now, it's because I'm trying to briefly summarize a mess of a show. And the bizarre addition of mechanized warfare makes no sense unless you read the books. The animation for this show is garbage tier, like Berserk 2016 or X-Arm kind of bad. Not only is it CGI'd to hell, but it gets super laggy at times, especially towards the end. There are even times where the animators forgot that creatures are more than 2 dimensions, and they animate puncture wounds as though they were inflicted on pieces of paper. And with it jumping back and forth between CGI for combat sequences and actual animation for non-combat sequences, the differences become very evident the more and more they happen. In the visual appeals department, this one is a real stinker. Shockingly enough, though, this show is fairly good in the narrative department. If you can get past the shock of cyborg elves and mechanized weapons in a fantasy world, the books give a good explanation as to what the hell is going on. Both the game-like functions of this world and the robot army the elves control have a good reason for being around, and it plays into the final conflict of the series. To add to that, there were even some twists that caught me off guard, which I guess is why I like this series. Well, that and I read the books. The anime is like a 4 out of 10 production, and all its points come from the writing aspect of it, which the studio animating this had nothing to do with. I liked a lot of the characters, and I liked the story, but yeah, I can't really recommend this anime to people. It's just that freaking hard to watch. But the books are another beast entirely. These I would give like an 8.4 out of 10. The anime leaves out quite a bit of information that might have been relevant, and it cuts some scenes that prove just how resourceful and clever Wakaba can be, which is another part of the charm of her character. The fact that she's the one narrating the vast majority of the books in real time, as in it's all written in first-person present tense, makes it that much more entertaining too. Wakaba's energetic and goofy personality shines through in every line she narrates, as she responds to events in real time. And when the point of view changes to someone more serious, like Julius or Wrath, you can tell, and their personalities and ideologies bleed through. I would say it's an excellent example of first-person writing. There's also the fact that this is an anti-hero show, with most of the main cast around Wakaba wanting to save the world at the expense of massive numbers of people, because it's the only way to go about it. Seriously, Wakaba and crew don't shy away from the extreme and very brutal methods of getting the results they want. Wakaba, Wrath, and Ariel are perfectly fine with going down in history as the greatest villains to have ever lived, because they know what's at stake and are willing to make those sacrifices even if, at sometimes, they're pretty selfish. Back to Wakaba. I like that her character isn't as overpowered as she appears to be at first glance. Her strengths are in her creativity and resourcefulness. Her ability to develop powers and strategies to defeat far more powerful enemies, or far more advanced enemies in the case of Patimus, is the most terrifying ability she possesses. It's a powerful character done well. A character made powerful by their intellect rather than just the sheer power of the abilities they possess. Now, with White, it's kind of both, because her teleportation is just freaking nutty. So overall, she rocks as the central figure of this show, and you get to watch her progress from insignificant bug to something godly in scale. So now you mix in the other faction, none of which are entirely good, with Dustin leading humanity and Patimus leading the elves. And you have a battle of sinners with the only goody-goody character being Shun, who's still too much of an idiot to realize just how bad things are, even after he ends up maxing out the taboo skill. With no true heroes at the center of this story, there's an interesting dynamic that takes place as every faction competes for their own ambitions, rather than in trying to solve the core problems. Then add in the world mechanics, the dynamic between various individual characters, and the deviations from very stereotypical isekai structure, and you end up with something that's entertaining. It's a good book series that suffered from a very bad anime, but it had a great deal of different takes on things that made it actually fun to read. It uses its elements well. Wakaba's goofy personality provides a lot of chances for this show to be humorous without sacrificing the stakes in the plot. And on top of that, the fact that on the inside she's so energetic and on the outside she's very reserved and shy is another thing that the show uses well to drive some humor. She's the best character in the series, which is good. It makes you want to be totally on board with her casual genocidal intentions. Plus, you have the system, the central plot device, that brings the whole story together. That gives this story a somewhat unique take on the game world isekais that are so prevalent. The series also sidelines the whole harem trope. While it's still there, as Shun is basically your stereotypical isekai protag with a harem, he's treated like a side character who's totally irrelevant to the story up until the battle with the elves. And the fact that all his powers are basically just plot armor protagonist bullshit, but he's pretty much a side character, is one of the funniest things about it. It's one of my favorite reversals in this series, and there are a handful of them. I like that it doesn't fall into a lot of the usual stupidity of isekai, and gives you a thought-out explanation for the game world mechanic and whatever other bullshit is happening in the world, and lands squarely in my S-tier isekai block solely for the novels. That, though, doesn't change the fact that it's still a stinker of an anime, and that the animation is abysmal. But that's all out of me. Like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. Have a great day and a wonderful week.